If not, they will be recording and it'll be available on the city website for replay by our citizens.
I was looking for that on the website earlier today for the last week's meeting, but I didn't see it. Do you know if it's a separate? It's
on
not
there.
in video.
It's on there.
Oh, is it video also? Or?
Let me confirm.
That's okay. We can do it later.
I believe they're going to make them available within the subsection that's been created for this committee. So if you search on oil and gas, you'll get to the city's page that was developed a couple weeks back.
Oh, 'cause I
and
went to
then
video.
from there, it's my understanding that they have created a subsection for this committee.
Oh.
And then all the materials that we collect through the course of the committee, questions that get submitted, answers that get raised, will all be made available for access from that site. So hopefully that'll be a help. Real quickly, I want to make sure we go around and do introductions. I know we've had a couple folks step in for others. I'm Jason McEldowney. I'm a council member at large here in Commerce City, and I'll be acting as the chair for the committee. We have had a quick change on Monday night through some discussions, and we've actually decided to have two of our council members sit as active members, and I will sit simply as the facilitator for these sessions. And so Renee Bullock has joined the panel and will be representing our city council. If we want to go ahead and move around the table and provide introductions. Steve, start with you.
Steve Douglas, City Council at Large.
I'm Brad Miller with Anadarko Petroleum.
My name is Phil Doe. I'm with Be the Change, and when I was employed, I was in charge of water policy for the Bureau of Reclamation Department of New Jersey.
Oh, and if I can just make one more request, I know it's going to be a big pain. Because we are streaming, we'd like to have the citizens hear what we're talking about. So we are limited to the number of mics that you see. So if we can pass those around actively, I don't need this one. Maybe you and I can share this. And that way we can make sure that citizens can hear everything.
Can we do it again?
If you don't mind.
I don't mind
Thank
at all.
you.
If I'm capable of operating this, am I on? I guess I am. My name is Phil Doe. I'm on the board of Be the Change, and previously I was employed by the Bureau of Reclamation. I was in charge of their water policy office.
Hi, I'm Tracy Snyder, former Mayor Pro Tem Commerce City.
I'm Dan Stapleton. I'm resident of Commerce City. Live in the Reunion neighborhood, about 2,200 feet from the most recent well.
Jim Benson, Commerce City City Council. I don't know what my distance is from that well, but I'm glad that I'm further away than you are. But anyway, thank you.
Wes Wilson with Be the Change. Previously, when I was employed, I was working for the Environmental Protection Agency here in Denver on environmental review, including oil and gas.
Dale Hopwood with Halliburton, sitting in for Brendan Baker this session.
I'm Jody Bacon, and I'm also a citizen of Commerce City and a member of Citizens for Safe Fracking in Adams County.
I'm Matt Lepore. I'm outside counsel for Hillcorp.
I'm Greg Duranlo. I'm the Oil and Gas Location Assessment Supervisor at the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and I'm sitting in for Director Dave Neslin.
Bill Barber, lawyer, special counsel to the City of Commerce City.
I'm Tisha Schuler. I'm President and CEO of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I'm sitting in for Andrew Casper today. And in my last life, I was an environmental scientist and environmental consultant.
Renee Bullock, and I'm one of the council members besides Steve Douglas that was selected by council to represent Commerce City on this board.
Thank you, everyone. Another couple folks that will be joining us, hopefully one of them this evening and another in our subsequent meetings. Council had asked, and we received some feedback from our community as well, to extend some additional experts to the panel. And so Ken Conright from Tri-County Health will be sitting in to help provide perspective from their area of expertise. And we've also will be joined by Charlie Sharman, who is with the Remediation Venture Office, or RMA, out at the refuge. So he'll help provide some great past perspective and current perspective on activities out at the refuge. With that said, I'll just give a quick recap of our previous meeting, and then obviously, given our late start, turn our attention to the agenda. Again, thanks to everyone for your participation in this event. We are excited about the dialogue that has begun. I think we all left with a good sense of, just a good sense, I think, after that first meeting, and eager to see where things track from there. The discussion is certainly lively. I do think also in listening to why folks were here and what they hope to accomplish, I heard a consensus on a desire for safe operations, an opportunity to discuss the concerns, and find opportunities for mutual agreement and action. And I think if we can keep those objectives common and in play, then it will help further these discussions. Mr. Benson? Are you not here? Is this mic not working?
Yeah, it's working.
Are we able to raise the volume or level on this? Yeah. Tom, are you in charge of the level on this? Is that better? Okay, great. Sorry for not being clear. So I guess with that said, our agreed upon agenda for this session was to begin with some educational presentations from our industry representatives. I believe we wanted to look at some process definition, and I think Koga had some materials that they thought that they could help present to help from that perspective. Okay, fantastic. Well, I will turn it over to you then, sir.
Okay.
And do we have your material up? Yeah, and in fact, is this mic live? We can turn you on here, and you're on.
All right. All right, thank you. Again, my name is Brad Miller. I'm a General Manager for Regulatory Affairs. I'm the General Manager for Regulatory Affairs for Anadarko Petroleum. I'm really here today to talk more about oil and gas industry and not about Anadarko Petroleum, and kind of give you some background. Chris Castillion, who I'm sitting in for tonight, said that, after seeing through the committee meeting, it'd be very interesting to give some people a little bit more background on oil and gas development in general. So we've got a brief presentation. I know Phil and Wes have seen this before, parts of it before. I've kind of I've reduced it a little bit in the interest of time. So with that, I'm going to jump into it and just basically talk about oil and gas development. And please feel free as we go through this to ask questions. I think that's the best way to do it instead of holding them for afterwards. Let's look at the points as we go through. So let's talk a little bit about drilling. Life cycle of a well. So how does this occur, and what's going on with the life cycle of a well? It's a long process. It takes quite a bit of time. From the time we decide that we want to drill a well, it's almost a year before we actually do drill that well. So how does that come about? We start looking at the subsurface geology. That's done through seismic, and in some areas that you all have heard about or seen seismic, that's where they lay out seismic monitors and lines. They're called geophones. They put those in the ground, and then they go out with the vibration trucks, and they come along and vibrate the ground at about every 30 or 40 feet, and then we take those signals and read it, and our geophysicists, they take a hard look at it and figure out what's going on. We have to understand the subsurface before we can go forward, and especially in the play that is so active in the area, and that's the Niobrara play. And there are specific areas that we'll be looking at.
Final question. In your seismic work with the Niobrara, are you able to identify the chalk zone?
We are able to see the chalk zone, and what we're actually able to do and we're looking for is additional faulting within that zone, and that's what we're looking for.
And you can do that with seismic?
Yes, we can do that with seismic. After we do that, our subsurface geologists take a hard look at it, decide on where it might be a potential opportunity. We look at potential surface topography. We also look at if it's an urban area, where we are, how we're going to operate and manage around that. We negotiate a surface use agreement that's required by the state of Colorado with everybody. We discuss the surface location with the surface owner. I think this is important, and for the citizens, I think it's important for you to understand, and the residents of a community to understand, that Where we have to go is where the surface owner tells us to do that. So we're going to be probably in an area, usually not right within your community, but just outside your community. You need to talk to that surface owner. If you understand that there's a permit coming up and you've been notified, it's very important that you talk to that surface owner and say, hey, we have a concern. We don't really, I understand that you want to put your, go ahead.
Sorry. With regard to that surface owner and the seismic testing, if there are houses on top of the target zone and you're going to go down and horizontally fracture under the houses, how do you know what the zone are composed of? I mean, can you seismically go at an angle and figure out what's over there?
Okay, what we'll do is take the general seismic, and it's hard to get under subdivisions because it's hard to lay lines and stuff in that particular area. We have they have radio geophones, so you might end up with one geophone in your front yard, and then they'll be able to see underneath that area. But if you shoot on one side of the subdivision and then you shoot on this other side and it looks like it's perspective, then you potentially go down and drill underneath the subdivision. But what I'm thinking on is more on the surface location more than the seismic, is when we get to the point of picking a location ready to drill, it's good to talk to that surface owner that owns that, so you don't end up, if you don't like a wellhead in a certain position where it may obstruct your view or you can see it, or if it's across the street from your house or where they might potentially put that tank battery, it's great to work with that surface owner because we have to work with him. What he tells us and where he wants that located, and it meets all the state and local requirements, that's where we're going to end up putting that well. So it's important to work with that surface owner. I think that's...
A question on that. So we are obviously now a local designee, and so when we talk about, or you refer to the permitting process, is that the point at which
that's a great
time. we would be able to find out about it, and then
that's the first place you'll find out under the local government designee. So I think that's where you'll find out when that's going on, and then you can find out where the proposed location is. My only concern a little bit about that is by the time we get to that point, the permit's been submitted, and we already have an SUA, because we have to submit that with our permit, so we have a surface use agreement with that surface owner. So what I would really recommend, if you think there's going to be drilling in your area, can you find out early on in the process? I mean, before there's anybody even approaches that surface owner, and kind of talk to them. Have your homeowners association, the president of the homeowners association, go over and talk to the surface owner next to him and say, hey, if this happens, let's kind of talk about, can we agree on an area where you would put that well?
Question. Why couldn't it be handled in the reverse order, which is you as the oil company inform the landowners and the people who live in the area that you're going to conduct operations here?
And we can do that. We can get hold of the HOAs and work with them, and we're willing to do that. Okay. And say, hey, this is where we're at, and talk to that landowner.
Yeah, I think just to that point, the concern is we're not, and we're certainly very keen to understand where earlier in the process we can have things appear on our radar. The notification as part of as an LDC is, or the local designee is sort of the earliest point that we're familiar with tuning in on that. And I guess we had asked last week about the ability for Anadarko or Hillcorp, et cetera, to come back with, I think they termed it as positions in our area. And so we're seeking some form of a map that helps us understand whose interests lie where, so that we could, whether it's engage you or the landowner and say, we understand that there is a position here. And it sounds like that might be another way to undertake that or initiate that dialogue. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that is a way that we could look at it and see who owns it. Anadarko, the reason that Anadarko has such a large landholding is we have the land grant, which we have minerals in perpetuity we got from President Lincoln. So we have a significant acreage holding. I think we can work with you and tell you, what are our plans. We can give you our plans maybe for a year time frame and potentially 2 years out, and just kind of sit down and work with you all on that. Our people are more than willing to do that. And I think that's the key. We have to work together as an industry and with the community, and especially when we're getting in these urban environments, we need to talk.
That's great.
Jason?
Yeah.
Now, here's where some expertise on the other side can come in. The industry is not willing to give you a full build-out.
A full what?
Full build-out.
Build-out.
A full development scenario so that you can do your planning. NEPA doesn't apply here. We have no process by which we get at the cumulative plan. We can help you with that. We know the spacing that the state allows. We know that this resource is likely to be completely developed. We don't miss wells in the Niobrara. So we could help you devise a scheme where you look at the worst case, the maximum development position. I can't expect it to come from either the state or the companies. Just as Mr. said, he would give you a year out, when his next well.
Well, Wes, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on that. I think we would be more than willing to come out and tell you what we think our development plans in that area are when we know them. We don't know them until after we get all our seismic and get a lot of our work done. And a maximum development scenario, don't know if that would come true. I think it's worth looking at, but I don't know if, we say, hey, you're going to drill every well in every location. We don't know until we get through the exploration piece of the
Understand, you're in charge with your capital investment. You would know. But if you were involved in a NEPA process, you would have to go through a reasonably foreseeable future development. And what we have here is a sustained resource, a continuous resource. It's not a trap. So it makes it actually more feasible to come up with a maximum development scenario. Can you tell me what you understand to be the spacing on horizontal wells on Niobrara within the state right now? Maybe that's a question for the state.
Yeah, that'd be better for...
Could I ask that question to the state? What is the current horizontal drilling spacing for the Niobrara?
Yes, absolutely. Here's where I should be... Thank you. We just recently, and actually I was not involved in the rulemaking that did address the change of spacing for the horizontal wells. And unfortunately my group looks at surface impacts, so I'm not the right state representative to answer that question, and I apologize for that.
Could you get that to us next week?
And I can absolutely get that information.
Thank you.
Let me take a little bit of a run at this. What the spacing is variable right now, and it is being developed as we go. So if an operator comes in and wants to space on 1,280 acres, which is 2 square miles, they can apply for that spacing. And if the engineering and geology supports that spacing, then the commission will space it for 2 square miles. The horizontal plays are new. This is new and evolving technology. But to put a well bore in that's going to run almost 2 miles is feasible. And it may be desirable. It may be desirable for a lot of reasons, including fewer surface impacts. If you have one well that runs 2 miles instead of 18 verticals or whatever it would take, you potentially have far fewer pads. 640-acre spacing is really common right now in the Niobrara. How many wells go into that 640? Again, that's evolving, that's changing. One well to start with, but for the most part, the science right now tells us that one well, even a horizontal, won't drain 640. So you're going to put 2 or 4 or 8. We don't know. But you're going to put them in as best you can to limit surface impacts. You could do, and Brad can help me here, 8 wells off a single pad? I think that's feasible.
You could potentially do 8 wells off a single pad.
Totally feasible. Okay, that's what we want to be able to do and look at doing. And let me just finish these thoughts. Go ahead. Yeah.
From a terminology perspective.
Yeah, sure.
From a terminology perspective, 640, I don't think folks who aren't industry specific, if we can just help translate some of that on the fly. I know we're going to try and develop a glossary.
Yeah, and thanks for interrupting me, Jason. That's a good point. So 640, I mean 640 acres. That's one section of land in the section and township range map system, and it's 1 square mile. Okay. And then you divide that up into quarters. So you got 4 quarters in a 640, which are each 160 acres. So a lot of vertical well spacing is on 40 acres. It means 1 well per 40 acres. Sometimes it's 80 acres. Sometimes it's 160 acres. All right. Now I want to respond a little bit to Mr. Wilson in this same vein. Sure, he can go out and tell you what the spacing is in some areas. It's not set in all areas. And he can look at the setbacks, all right? There are setbacks from the section line, so you can't drill right up against the boundary line. There's a reason. The reason is you're not allowed to drain your neighbor's property, okay? Those aren't your minerals on the other side of that line. You can't drain them, so you have to stay back from that boundary line, all right? And now, so there's resources under there. Whether those resources are economic to develop changes over time. It changes all the time. Gas is below $3 million cubic yards, whatever the measurement is. Sorry. Thank you. Gas is inexpensive right now. Do you want to invest the capital resources to get that out of the ground? Today, tomorrow, next year, next decade? We don't know. So I have to take exception to Mr. Wilson saying that he can tell you today the maximum development scenario. I don't think that he can do so reliably. I don't think anybody can do so reliably.
I cannot do so reliably. But the point is for a comprehensive plan to be developed by the industry to present to Commerce City. I'd certainly rather have them do it and us review it. But if the industry's unwilling to do it, we can take the 8 per section and give you a possible, reasonably foreseeable future build-out plan. It's their reticence to do so that I'm jumping into and saying we can offer those services.
I'd like to make a suggestion as a matter of process, and I'll defer to our chairman, but we're probably 20 minutes into our 20-minute allotted presentation time, and we're 40 minutes into our allotted 2-hour time. So I would just maybe suggest, even though Mr. Miller generously offered to accept questions, that maybe we should just let him give his presentation and table questions for the end to ensure that we get to see all the material.
Yeah, because I have questions as well, so I'd rather for you to finish your presentation and then...
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll go ahead and do that. Good discussion, though. I'm going to touch on one of the things that did come up. We are in the exploration phase in this particular area. We have been in the exploration phase up in Laramie County. So I'm going to kind of refute a little bit what Wes says. It is not a blanket, and we don't know where it is everywhere. 50 wells have been drilled up there with some success and some not successful. So it isn't blanket in the Niobrara. We don't know. Where we do know is in Wattenberg field area. Yeah, we have had substantial success, but the exploration phase is done there because they produced the Niobrara for 30 or 40 years. So they know it's producible. It's just, can you drain it properly? And now with horizontal drilling, you can. So we don't know. If you get out of the Wattenberg field area proper, we don't know if south of there or north of there is going, or west or east is going to be productive. So there is still exploration going on. Where are we at on an exploration case? An exploration case is 1 in 10 or 2 in 10. All right, for an exploration well. Then you will develop off of that. And we don't know the aerial extent or the size of that. But that's kind of where we are right now. If you take a look up in Wyoming, again, variable success. It is an exploration phase. Drilling operations, we'll come back in. Well, I'll go back up. We stake locations, file forms with the COGCC, and start the permitting process. Permitting process takes anywhere from 30 days to a little bit, could be up to 90 days if we have to answer questions and we're working on different opportunities. Build road and location, after we get that done, everything is settled, SUAs are settled, and everything's worked out. Build road and location, it's 6 to 10 acre pad, which is a relatively large pad, but I'll show you some pictures in a little bit what we reclaim back to. We reclaim back to less than 3 acres, and usually it's about 1.5 acre pad site. The drilling rig will be on location for 20 days. Now, that's for a single well. If you drill 4 wells in a section, you're going to be out, you'll see a drilling rig out there for 80 days. The industry is really trying to work in urban environments. How do we do that? We're trying to position our lights. They go opposite. We put barriers up so when trucks drive into location that you can't see it. We put up, actually, the barriers are not just like walls. We actually put up big hail bays. Why do we put up hail bays that are 30 feet tall? Because it absorbs the sound. You don't have to listen to the noise. So there are a lot of things that the industry is trying to do to work very closely with the residents to make this to be as the least obtrusive or intrusive as possible. Completion operations. Okay, so those wells are drilled. It's going to be probably 30 to 60 days. Really, very little activity will go on. Then the completion operation takes over. Now, I'll tell you, on the completion operations, and I'll show you some pictures in a minute, this is the area that is probably the most active because you have trucks hauling water into location. You're going to have trucks on location for up to 3 days, 4 days pumping. Full time on that. So that can be moving in and being kind of obtrusive to what you're trying to do. We do the stimulation phase. Then we work on flow back. We flow back into our takes. We try to recycle as much of the water as we get back. We only get back about 10 to 20% of the water from our jobs, and then we haul that to the next location. Operations then, after we stimulate, we get it on production, you'll see a pipeline laid to the area, and then there's reclamation. Again, we reclaim to less than 3 acres, and like I was saying, about 1.5 acres as we go. What will be left, I'll show you pictures in a little bit, it will be a wellhead, potentially a pumping unit, and then you'll see some tanks and facilities as well. Let's talk about wellbore construction. I want to start with the vertical well because what we're seeing in the Reunion area, I understand that there's older wells out there that were fracked, and that's a vertical well. So let's talk a little bit difference and some of the regulations. And I think this is one of the most important slides, and this is what the COGCC does. They regulate a wellbore construction, and this is the most important piece. You have a good wellbore, then there's really very little to worry about after that. The wellbore is the most important piece. And I want to remind you of that. And it's regulated heavily. So 317A, we drill down through the water aquifers, the deepest water aquifers, and we drill 50 feet below. That's state requirement. Anadarko drills 150 feet below, and then we cement back behind that. We run steel casing, 8 5/8 casing, and a 9 3/4 hole, and that is heavy walled casing. It's over a 1/4 inch thick walled casing. Stuff weighs about 24 pounds per foot. It's pretty heavy. It's very heavy wall casing. Then we cement back behind that, okay? So what you have is then you have a 2-inch layer of cement that goes all the way from the base, in which that's going to be, in this particular area, around 900 to 1,000 feet. And we circulate cement all the way back to the top. We ensure that we get returns. We make darn sure we get returns. If we don't see the cement on the surface, we go back inside, the backside, and we make sure that the cement comes all the way to the surface. It is the most important piece. From that point, you drill through that 8 5/8 casing with a 7-inch bit, and you drill all the way down vertically to TD. You get down to it, and that TD is total depth of the well. So in this particular area, that's about 7,000 feet. We run 4.5 or 5.5-inch casing, and again, we circulate cement. We try to get it back to surface, but we ensure that it gets all the way back up into the surface pipe. That's not state requirement, but that's what Anadarko does. We make sure we're back into the surface pipe. How do we prove that? We run what we call a bond log. Halliburton runs bond logs. And we have Halliburton come out and they run an electrical log where they can see if the bond behind the pipe is sufficient. When I say sufficient, if there's good bond. If there's not good bond behind the pipe, we will go in, we'll put holes in the pipe, and then we'll circulate cement to make sure we have good pipe. Then the formation, again, is about 6,000, 7,500 feet. What do we do? People are wondering about the water that we drill with. We actually use clear water all the way down to 6,000 feet. And then we have to put in some additives, and it's pretty minimal. What we put in is some pH control and some bentonite clay. Basically, it's bentonite clay is what we put in. Why do we put bentonite clay? It swells, and what that does is then it picks up the cuttings because we have to be able to wash the cuttings out of the hole and get those back to the surface. The reserve pits are claimed actually on reserve pits. I hate that that's on there, but that is the state reg. You can have reserve pits. Almost all of industry's gone away from reserve pits. We're trying to go to closed loop, and I know Anadarko in particular, we use closed loop systems exclusively out here. What does that mean? There are no open reserve pits. So that is important, and that's a great opportunity for. Go ahead, Matt.
Tell everybody what a reserve pit is and how that's different than a drilling pit.
Very, very good. So when we drill, you have cuttings. And it's like you're digging with a shovel, right? You got a lot of dirt you got to get outside the hole. So when we're drilling down to 7,000 feet. We have to lift those cuttings from 7,000 feet to surface. So this is the technique of drilling. You pump mud down the drill pipe. It picks up those cuttings, lifts those all the way to surface. And then we have what we call a shale shaker. We shake all those cuttings out, and they go into what we call a reserve pit. The reserve pit holds those cuttings, all right? And then the fluid goes into, I guess we call it drilling pit or our closed loop system. And so those are metal tanks that sit on location, and so that there's no exposure to the ground in any way with the drilling fluids. It's all a contained system. The water is cleaned up so well, it's amazing when you put your hand under that, when you see that drilling water and it comes back after it's been through the system, it's clear water, and we pump it back down the hole again. And continue to utilize that. So let's talk about a horizontal well. Same rules apply. We have to cement the same way. What we do differently is we drill the surface pipe, then we drill all the way down to what we call the horizontal depth, or then our target formation. We go horizontal in that formation. As soon as we go horizontal, then we run the production string. And then inside the production string, down at the bottom, and I don't know if this will show, in that particular area, you can't see it real well, but that's a liner. We put a liner in the hole, and then we cement that liner in, or we use packers. And then inside that, we'll run tubing back to the surface. So what we have, again, is 2 layers of casing and 2 layers of cement, and then the production comes up through tubing. And the tubing is, again, a 3rd layer of protection. So we have 3 layers of protection between where the producing fluids are and where the groundwater is, between the formation. So that's kind of how we work on that. Horizontal wells, if you look at that, takes a little more dollars. A vertical well costs about $750,000. A horizontal well costs about $4.5 million. So they're substantially more expensive. So we want to make sure that we get it right. Fracture stimulation procedures on a vertical well, just larger volumes more than anything on the fracture stimulations, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that as we go.
Could you define fracture so people know what that's about?
Okay, yes, I will in a sec. I've got a slide on that. Okay, so what do? The rig shows up, we drill down. Just like I said, we get a horizontal kickoff point about 6,300 feet. We drill at an angle to about 7,000 feet, and then we drill all the way through the formation horizontally. That's what it looks like. So what we do, why it works so much better, is we have a lot more contact with the formation. That's why it's more productive, and then we're able to stimulate that, and I'll show you another slide on this too. So why do we drill horizontally? Okay, if you go up to the Wattenberg field, the spacing on that is like 32 wells per section is what you could drill vertically. And there are some sections that are drilled that way. This display only shows 16. So there could be that as many as 32 wells up there. So 20-acre spacing, that's pretty significant. This is a 40-acre spacing in a square mile. That's a 640-acre section. And that's what as we talk about. So why do we want to drill horizontally? Well, we go down and we drill horizontally, and then we'll fracture stimulate. So see each one of those dots? Instead of having to drill a well at each one of those dots, now we drill horizontally, and then we can perforate underneath the ground, and that's just like having one of those vertical wells at every one of those spots, but it's underground. So you've really saved a lot of locations. So think about that. For that particular area, I would drill 4 different rows of wells. Okay, you potentially could drill that, and then if you completed 4 spots along that, it would be the same thing with 4 wells instead of 16 wells. But actually, we have a lot better opportunity, is we know the formation is tight, and 16 wells or 32 wells isn't enough to drain it. So, but it's very expensive to drill a bunch of vertical wells, and it really occupies a lot of space. So our opportunity is to drill a horizontal well and frack that anywhere from 12 to 18 times. So that's like 18 different wells along that row or along that well bore to produce the same. Yes?
Just a quick question. When we hear the term swabbing, what exactly does that mean?
Okay, so what you do when you swab is the tubing that I told you about that was in the hole? You go in with a wire line, and it has cups on the bottom. They're called rubber swab cups. And what that does is fluid comes in the formation. The well doesn't have the ability to lift the fluid. So what you do is you swab the fluid back to the surface. Now what that does is it's contained, all right? So what you have is a pack off on the top around the wire. And as the swab and the fluid comes up, then it goes out a valve and a pipe to the tanks as we're swabbing that fluid back. So that's what the swabbing operation is. Does that make sense?
When you do the swabbing, that actually is part of the fracking process?
Well, it's afterwards. It's part of the it's called the completion process. Yeah, that's after the.
Okay.
Just one quick point. Because it's afterwards, the chemical used in swabbing won't be reported in the fracking rule.
Everything that we pump downhole and intentionally put down there, is put in there is in the fracking rule.
The different chemical that they use in different places?
No, there's no different chemicals. The pump chemicals we pump down is what we bring back on fracture simulation. I think what Wes is referring to is you also get back oil. I mean, you're going to get back oil. That's what we're trying to find, oil and natural gas. So that might be in addition what comes back. So that's what the difference is, what's in the formation. But we report everything we put into the formation.
Yeah,
right?
Brad, can I?
I think the discussion here, it's after we're talking about here, but basically we're talking about a specific well that's been in production for a long time. So it's not, probably not many fluids on this well, or any at all. It's all just oil, water, and gas. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they're just trying to get the water out of the way so the gas will flow again.
Yeah.
So this is an old well, so it's nothing to do with the fracturing in this case, our case.
I just wanted to understand what it was because the term's come up several times in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I just want to lend some context to this situation. There is actually a specific well that we're talking about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we go to the horizontal wells, and this is kind of development in 1 square mile. You would have 2 pads, and you could drill a well to get 2 different locations. But actually what we're trying to accomplish is what I'm showing here, and actually we'll drill probably up to 4 wells in a particular section, and then we do it from a single location. So there's even less disturbance, and there's less obtrusive nature to it because we try to put as many wells as we can on a single pad. So it's essential to economic development, maximizes contact with the reservoir, and minimizes surface use. Okay, so this is fracking. All right, this is what a fracturing on a location, and there's a bunch of red trucks out there. It's probably Halliburton. And we have a pink valve. Why do we have a pink valve? That's so we know there's a pink valve. It's different color than everything else. So everybody felt good about that. So anyway, this is kind of the fracking that we're looking at. These are all the different trucks that are out there and what you'll see on location. So again, on hydraulic fracturing, it's essential to oil and gas and reservoirs. Multiple layers of steel casing and pipe and cement that we talked about, protecting the groundwater, as we said earlier. But what's it really do? It involves injecting a mixture of water, sand, and additives into the formation under pressure. And what you'll see is multiple trucks and tanks of water and additives or chemicals, if you want to call them, on the surface. What is it? It's 95% water and quartz sand. That's what it is. That's 95%. 5% or less is additives or chemicals. Okay, that's what we're putting in there. That 0.5% and that total volume is actually what is reported in Frac Focus. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And that's what the state requires us to report. Here's what I get. I get a lot of times, we do pump a lot of water. Okay, we're going to pump 1 million gallons. You might pump up to 2 million gallons of water. It's a lot of water. And 0.5% of that is additives or chemical. And that's like, wow, that's a lot of chemicals sitting out there. But mind you, that chemical is mixed. All right, it is mixed into the water and diluted to less than 0.5%. And no matter what we pump, it's pumped downhole at less than 0.5%. Don't get confused when people walk up and say, okay, golly, they're going to pump 50,000, it's not that much, about 25,000 gallons of fluid, of chemicals. Yeah, but that will happen in a diluted state. It will be extremely diluted all the way down there. So most of the chemicals are in there at 1 to 1/1000%.
You know, I don't know that it makes a great deal of difference to me whether it's 0.5% or 5%. It'll kill you if you get it in your body. So whether, you know, what's the point here?
Well, the dilution at that low percentage is below the requirements, and dilution is what's important on this. That it is extremely diluted and becomes. I can't say the chemical itself is not hazardous, but in a diluted state, then it's not as hazardous.
Well, because like with Adams County, with the chemicals, you have parts per billion, parts per million.
Yes.
So when those chemicals are down there, what percentage is that part of the state regulation now to show parts per billion, per million of the chemical?
Right, the new regulations, so a couple things. One, The dilution is important if you think about the total volume of the fluid and where is that fluid ultimately going. So to the first question. To the second question, Frac Focus will identify each constituent and what you can look at Frac Focus right now and see at what the concentration is. But back to the original point, just like you want to isolate your cleaning chemicals at home from your cooking, Brad will talk about we're isolating all fluids in the drilling process from drinking water. And so although they are dilute, we still don't want them to come into contact with drinking water.
Yeah, and absolutely. That's like we talked about before. We've got two strings of pipe and potentially 3 in cement. And that's why I was saying why the well bore and proper well bore structure is so important. That's why that is the key to what we're doing. And that's why the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission regulates that so closely. They really keep on top of that. So that's what's important. And then the pressure, what it does is it creates cracks in the formation that are a mile from any kind of drinking water aquifers that we put the sand into, and then we produce back the oil, water, and the gas. So this is kind of what it looks like. Now this is a little smaller job. This is a vertical job. It's the best aerial picture that I had. But we have water tanks on location. Then you have pump trucks. You have what we call a blender. What happens in the blender, that's where the water comes into. That's where the sand comes from these sand trucks. And then that's where the chemicals would come into it too. And they all are blended at that one point and then pumped down whole. Everything's managed from a frac van, and it goes down to then it's pumped, and it goes down the wellhead from that point.
Is there a way we could get a copy of this PowerPoint? Because I have members of our community will ask me, they'll send me emails, oh my gosh, they're going to fracture, and I would say, do you see this? And I'd like to be able to show them this is what fracturing is, not just a well truck.
Yeah, we can.
So if we could get a copy of this, that'd be fantastic, and we can kind of let the community know better what's involved.
Absolutely, yeah, we can get you a copy.
Are the wells in this area likely to be horizontal or vertically?
Yeah, they're going to be a combination. I think there's vertical wells here already in this particular. But I think future development will be more on the horizontal side. I would anticipate more horizontal wells than vertical wells.
And going back to your prior picture, if it was a horizontal well, what magnitude of additional equipment would somebody expect out at the site?
So this site right here is about 3 acres. So we're talking about a 6-acre site. I think on this particular location, there's 35 tanks, 30 or 35 tanks. There could be up to 300 tanks. So it could be significantly larger for that short period of time.
Thank you.
Okay, so fracture fluid applications, we have water tanks, pump trucks, sand movers, blenders. So like I said, there's a lot of activity associated with fracture stimulation, and I want the community to be well aware of that. There are a lot of trucks. This is the most active part of the whole process, but thank goodness it's the shortest part. It's about 10 days. Niobrara fracture designs are up to 18 stages, mainly primarily water and sand, and the additives will include, there's gels sometimes. That's a guar, which is the basis for a lot of food products. There's biocides, which are bleach. There are some products for hospital sterilization. I'm not going to downplay it. You don't want to go drink it, okay? But it is for sterilization. There's friction reducer, which is polyacrylamide. Polyacrylamide is nail polish, so you do have that in your house. It's actually polyacrylamide is chapstick. That's the main constituents in chapstick. So there are those are kind of the main constituents of what's put in. But then those are made up of multiple chemicals. And if you look at the Frac Focus list, the derivative of that is there's probably 20 different chemicals in a frac job. But you can go out and look at that, get on the Frac Focus website, and really learn about it. And I think it's important. This Frac Focus is voluntary, but many of the states are requiring it. Texas is requiring it. Arkansas is requiring it. Colorado is requiring it. Wyoming doesn't require Frac Focus, but they also require reporting in this type of a manner. So be sure to go out and check on fracfocus.org. I think it's an important website. It gives you a lot of information, and you can zoom down to the well in your particular area and try to understand what's going on with that well.
Excuse me, Brad, just a quick question. I tried to search Frac Focus for a Niobrara well. And can you do that? I couldn't search for a horizontal well compared to vertical.
I think
I see hundreds of wells in Will County, and I can't search between the two.
But what you can do is you can get down to your specific area. So you can search on it by location. And so you can look at it as a geo search is a good way to put it. So you can search on it all the way down to a location in your house or your area. If you want to go through, you can go through every well and pick out which ones are Niobrara and which ones are not. That's all reported in Frac Focus as well.
But there's no way to select out just the Niobrara ones?
Yeah. All right, the groundwater quality in Colorado and the groundwater protection plan and Colorado groundwater sampling plan. We think this is very important, and it's voluntary in this part of the state. And I'll let COGCC maybe would comment better on that than us. But in the southern part of the state, it's required, and I think it's going to be required in all parts of the state. But independent third-party experts collect water samples before you drill the well. So I think this is important. You get the baseline, so you see where you're at. And then we come back right after the well is drilled and test the groundwater in this particular area. And then 3 or 6 months, and then potentially a year later, you come back and test the groundwater again. So we be sure we're testing the groundwater for any kind of contamination associated with if there is anything that is going on with drilling to make sure that that's safe.
Do you have to get permission from the landowner to drill into the aquifer and test water, or is that part of your lease?
We don't drill into the aquifer. You actually test the water wells within that particular area that are already drilled.
But I think the answer was yes.
We get permission. Yes, we have to have permission from the well owner to get a water sample, but we don't drill a new water well.
And if there are no water wells in the area, then what do you do?
I can answer that. So the Colorado Oil and Gas Association has the statewide baseline water sampling program. To the first question about, is that like applause? The baseline, to the first question, landowners have to provide permission not only to have their well sampled, but all the data is available to the public, so they have to agree to that condition. If there's within a mile, if there's no landowners, then there's no samples that are collected. And there's also springs and seeps. So in areas like this, that's just not a likely situation. And to expand on Brad's earlier point, there are 2 mandatory baseline water programs in the state. One is in the DJ Basin, and one is in the San Juan Basin. In the San Juan Basin in southwest Colorado, data has been collected for 10 years, pre- and post-sampling, and every 3 years. So Colorado has the most comprehensive baseline water sampling data in the nation. That's demonstrated there's no systematic contamination of groundwater from oil and gas operations in one of the most active parts of the state. That's all publicly available on the COGCC website.
Only 2 places that it's actually required? Because this is a voluntary program, it looks like here.
This is a voluntary statewide program. We do have operators representing 90% of all wells drilled participating in the program.
Because there was one well that was listed, I remember on they talked about Gasland, and the COGCC went and tested those. They were mentioned, and one of the 3 wells in Fort Lupton was affected. And they mitigated it, but it was actually in the GOGCC documents on their test that it did affect the well. Not fracking, but the drilling.
There are incidents in Colorado where groundwater has been contaminated by oil and gas drilling, so I don't mean to negate those well-documented experiences, but there is 10 years worth of drilling data that demonstrates that you're not by default contaminating groundwater through oil and gas operations. There's an entire basin with thousands, I believe over 7,000 data points, all third-party analyzed and all publicly available.
So I just want to do a quick time check. We're at 5 minutes after, and I know we got a late start, but this has obviously been a good, active discussion. I want to make a quick suggestion on the agenda. We have a citizen presentation that's supposed to come up next. I want to allow this presentation to complete, so any ballpark on? Okay, so that will give us 10 minutes. I want to then set aside item number 4 on our agenda, which is listed as issue and data identification. I think what I'd suggest is that we digest this presentation and the citizen presentation, as well as I believe we have answers that are going to be coming back from industry based on the list of questions that went out on email earlier this week. So perhaps Some of that can happen offline, if that makes sense. I want to make sure we also get to the 10-minute slot at 10 of 7 for our citizens to chime in. And then I want to talk briefly at the end of that about setting up the agenda for next week. And hopefully get folks out of here as close to 7 as we can, given the weather. So everyone okay with that? Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Sorry about running over. Just quickly, this is what you'll see this is a vertical well, but you'll see a wellhead out in the field. There's a separator. You'll see pipelines be put in, condensate and oil tanks in the area, and then emission control devices because we are a non-attainment area in the Denver area. Okay, so in this particular area, we are ozone non-attainment, and what that means is EPA has certain standards for ozone, and the Denver area is in excess of that. Been in the ozone non-attainment for many years, but what that means to you on an oil and I on the oil and gas basis is we control our wells. We control our wells tonight. We're required to control to 95%. In a majority of the situations, for Anadarko anyway, we can try to control to 99% of air emissions. So anything that is controlled, we control it out here. It's very important to us to do that. This is a vertical well, but there were multiple wells on a pad. It's reclaimed back. This happened this last year. These wells were drilled, and now the farmers farm right up to that in Weld County. Just quickly, from rig to well, drilling rig 20 days. We have fracturing going on, hydraulic fracturing 3 days. And I think the pumping process is 3 days. The overall process is about 10 days, and then potentially a pumping unit on the well for a significant period of time. So benefits to the economy, this is more for the council members. $440 million since 2007. That's what Anadarko has paid. We've invested $1.5 billion since 2007. Actually, in 2012, we will put $1.5 billion into this particular area just in Colorado this next year, so it'll be pretty significant. We have 950 employees in Colorado and growing, and we provide direct and indirect employment. Every rig employs about 120 people. So it's pretty significant. Anadarko has been recognized by David Neslin and COGCC for environmental protection, water quality protection, and community relations. So I finished less than 5 minutes. Any questions? Any more?
I do have a couple of questions, if that's all right. I saw you said it would take 20 days. I take that to be a working month for one well. And
well, it's not. It's 20. We work 20 days in a row. It takes about 20 days.
Oh, so you don't. It's overtime. It's 20 working. It's solid 20 days. You don't take any time off.
Yes.
All right. So if you put 16 in, you'd be looking at over a year that you'd be out on this pad, right?
Let's see, 60. That'd be 320 days if you put 16 wells on the pad. Yeah.
Okay. But so that when you say one well, it doesn't look that industrial. When you say 16 wells or 32. Or if there's a variance, you get 52, then you're talking about an extended period of time where you're going to have trucks going back and forth, and there'll be tremendous disruption, I would think. Whether you have straw bales there or not, it's going to be pretty disruptive. Am I missing something here?
It can be, but the industry can work very closely with the public to try to make it as less intrusive as we can. And let's be practical. Let's be realistic. I think Matt said 8 wells. That, to me, to Anadarko, that's on the high end. All right. Yeah, 32 wells. I guess if we're looking at we like to look at it in probabilities. If you're looking at the worst case scenario, yeah, 52 wells on a pad. Or 32 wells on a pad. That would be the worst case scenario, but unrealistic. So let's say 8 wells. So 8 wells would be 160 days at the maximum. 160 days, that is intrusive.
But that's drilling. It doesn't include the other activities that would be taking place there.
Let's take an overall look at it. You're on. Let's say that we do 8 wells, so it's going to be 160 days, and then it's about a month. But you're going to frack all 8 wells at the same time. Right. So then that total process would be about another 40 days on top of that. So up to 200 days. Let's say if it's the maximum that we're going to do.
And I have a couple more that I think the public should have some information on. It seems to me that from what we've been told, from what Wes and I have been told, there's a difference between operational chemicals that you use in a well and the fracking chemicals. Now, our understanding is that operational chemicals are not reported as part of the fracking activity. Is this true or not true?
That's correct, because it's not part of fracking activity.
So it's not reported?
It's not reported, except we have to keep records of anything we have on location required by COGCC that they can come and look at any time if there is an instance. So yes, we keep a constant record of any chemical that shows up on location, and it is recorded, and COGCC does have access to it.
Okay. And then I have a question about access. I'm familiar with the federal regulations on this, and in that case, you have to show due diligence. You have to have attempted to make contact with the surface owner if it's split estate. We're only talking about split estate here. But if you can't make contact, you simply go to the government and say, we couldn't make contact, and they give you access. Is that true with in every case? Are the state rules like that? In other words, if you can't make contact with the surface owner on split estate, you have the right to go. Well, I know you have the right to go in. So how is that handled?
In Colorado, you have to have a SUA or a surface use agreement with the surface owner before you can move in. Otherwise, you have to go to the state and get permission, and the state works on how are you going to have access into that location.
And so what is the final action? I mean, say you can't reach agreement, then what happens?
Then the state goes and settles it for you. Either you don't have access or you work with the state, and the state settles it.
They decide how you get access if you can't reach agreement.
If you can't reach agreement.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Brad.
All right. I'd like to make this the last question for this round, and then I'd like to turn it over to the citizens to make your presentation or walk through questions. I'm not sure which approach that you had in mind, but I want to make sure that we give you that 30 minutes, 35 minutes until about a quarter till.
Well, can I have, it's kind of a blend of both, because there's some concerns to just drop down, and there's also some questions to go over as well. So
I'm flexible. I want to make sure we get, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, let him finish. I want to respond to Mr. Doe just on one point.
I guess the point is the citizens are in charge of that 30-minute window. So if you would like to use that to continue this format, then we can certainly do that, however you'd like to allocate that time. What I want to make sure we do is have sufficient discussion today that we can all take away some good items for consideration so that when we come back next time, we can start to structure this list about what are the things that we really want to start to get serious discussion going on about, to say, COGCC, this is what we'd like you to take into consideration, industry, et cetera. So with that said.
My quandary is that I'd like to maybe spend 5-10 minutes doing the concerns. However, that'll generate questions from other parties, and actually I'd kind of like other questions to be asked. So then it kind of creates a gap. So maybe you should ask questions first, and when we have 10 minutes left to go, let us know. We'll stop and bring up the concerns, if that sounds all right.
Fine. Let's go ahead and wrap up a few more questions and then jump in on your list.
Did Matt want to say something real quick before?
I just, for the citizens, for Mr. Doe, the surface owner consultation rules for the COGCC is Rule 306A. It's pretty clearly spelled out that the operator must consult with the surface owner. If they absolutely cannot reach agreement, then the COGCC would intervene and try to broker an agreement. It's fairly rare that that happens. But there is a process and there is a rule.
I actually had a question. At the end of the day, we understand the process, we understand everything you're doing, and the cementing, the casing, and the safety measures. But my question is, and I haven't been able to put my finger on it, I've done some calculating with the help of others, but at the end of the day, really what it boils down to is how many incidents, how many contamination events occur, say, every 100 wells that are drilled. I've heard a lot of people, and yet last night we heard a lot of things like, well, it's highly unlikely. Well, maybe it's likely. I've heard a lot of generalities, and my question is really what, in terms of those occurrences, per 100 wells, what are the accidents or the incidents and contaminations that are taking place? Because at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about.
me to take that? So I don't have a number, and I would be happy to follow up with you, but I was at a presentation where COGCC was asked this question, and they came up with an estimate of something like, we have 40,000 wells in the state, and over the history of the last several decades, there's been something along the lines of 20 groundwater contamination incidents. So that gives you a 20 over 40,000 number with which to work. Since the rules were comprehensively reviewed in 2008, the two areas that are most important for protecting groundwater have been addressed in those rules, and that's the cementing and casing that we talked about, and that's the way that you manage surface spills and you remediate surface spills. So
I guess the follow-up question would, the cementing and the casing, what's the failure rate? I mean, can you tell me incidences where there's been a failure with the casing with the cement? And how many per 100 or however you would like to measure that? When has that occurred?
Right, that includes, the 20 includes all spills that could affect groundwater. So there are very relatively few incidents in the state over a multi-decade period of oversight. Since the new rules went into place in 2008, we have every aspect of the cementing and bonding is now regulated in a different way, and we've had no incidents of failure. And we're drilling more than 3,000 wells a year.
Right.
Well, that's simply not correct.
Yeah, that's
and
based on what I've heard is not.
What we'd like to do is give you an opportunity to hear from Shane Davis next week, and we'll go through. He can go through in about 20 minutes the Weld County hundreds of cases of groundwater contamination.
That's Mr. Wilson, you are incorrect. I was at that presentation that was given last night, and those are a summary of surface spills over the course of decades. And the question that I was responding to was casing failures per 100 wells. We've had over 3,000 wells drilled this year without a casing failure.
Well, it helps when you ask the question to be a little more specific. If you're asking a question about hydraulic fracturing operations or all drilling operations,
Right. I mean,
either way, it's fine.
Coming from my perspective, I don't really care what the definition is. What I care about is the contamination events, what the failure rate is.
But the failure rate of casing is a different question than every contamination event.
Right. That was a follow-up
related,
question.
Oil and gas. And I understand.
And so I guess what I'm asking for is really specific numbers, because again, my point in the beginning was we've been hearing a lot of, well, we're fairly certain, we're fairly uncertain. It's somewhere around. I mean, I would like to know specifically, because the numbers we're getting from other very credible sources are that those really aren't correct numbers. So, I mean, if we could get the actual numbers, that would be fabulous, and I don't know if we get that from the COGCC, but...
And that was my question as well. I'm sorry, you're the woman that presented last night at your meeting, Jim, her name?
Debbie Baldwin.
Debbie Baldwin. Debbie quoted last night a number that said between 2008 and 2010, there was an average of one spill event a day of an average of 5,600 gallons. And so, I'd spent some time recently out on the COGCC website, and there's a spills and incidents report that you can go out to. You can query by type of event. I mean, there's a number of ways to query that data. And you can clearly see, if you scan down it just sort of visually, there's certainly something happening every day. The thing that struck me, and I'd like some comments from industry on this, is that I went in expecting to see, as Ms. Bacon cited, concerns about the drilling and the immediate concerns about the fracking itself. What I saw that was more concerning to me were, I guess, what I would call sort of operational incidents where a vehicle is driving onto site, and these are pretty crude roads. They tear open the gas tank on the vehicle and they spill all their diesel fuel. Or the pipe between the well and the containers fails for some reason. Metal fatigue, there's a hole in the tank, and so they get a slow leak, not unlike what we've just seen here at Commerce City at the Suncor property, where something has failed and it's leaked into the environment. And so those reports, when you read them, talk about the remediation efforts. So they've got to take the soil out, they've got to do all these things to bring that property back. I'm just trying, I guess, to Ms. Bacon's point, also get into my head, when the activity intensifies in our area, and we see a tank farm that sits 500 feet, well, what appears to be 500 feet, a couple blocks, if you will, visually.
Time's up.
That's a sign.
Am I back on? It's a stone's throw literally from homes. My concern now becomes the failure of those connections between the well and the containers or the condensate. And so I would just like, I guess, as another aspect or facet to her question, some comments on that front.
Well, I'll make a comment. That stuff happens. I mean, there's no question. Nobody's trying to say that it doesn't. It happens in the oil and gas industry. It happens in Suncor. It happens in industrial activities. It may be hard to get a number on that, and that's why that's what I was trying to get at in response to yours is if you're asking us for every incident that has ever happened at an oil and gas operation, I mean, we can try to find that number for whatever value that carries.
Well, when it potentially could happen outside of my house, I guess I would be interested in getting those numbers. Literally, it's a stone's throw from home. So yeah, I mean that would be a useful number. And to add on to what I'm saying is, we've got the concern about the incident numbers, and we've got credible people telling us that your numbers don't really jive with their numbers. So really what we want is the truth. The second piece that drives me to want those numbers is, in looking at the permit from the first well on Tower, there's a couple of things in here. First of all, the fencing, and I don't mean to jump from topic to topic, but there's a reason why these numbers are so important to us because simply, in the permit, there were a number of things that were said were going to be done that were not done. So...
Is this the Custy well or the AB well?
This is the...
Before we move into that, can I just address the question about spills because I don't think we addressed it comprehensively, and it sounds like we're about to get into the specifics of a well. I think that your questions are hitting on the most important reasons for these kind of engagements. I really do, because surface spills, if you ask those of us in industry, what are the two areas most important to protect groundwaters are surface spills and cementing and casing, and so these are valuable conversations. And yes, incidents do occur in industrial activities. The thing that I want to say that's important is that, one, every spill is unacceptable to industry. So they do happen and they are unacceptable, and we are partners with our communities, we're part of these Colorado communities as well. We are partners in ensuring that we are preventing these. But what is also important is that every spill has to be addressed comprehensively, even if it's below the reporting threshold. And we do have operators that literally report frozen dripsicles, icicles that form because they take this so seriously. Someone told me when we spill coffee on site, we literally go through our remediation procedures. Every spill has to be completely remediated, and I have often heard said that that's not the case, but it is. And in fact, my whole career before I did this was assessing and cleaning up those spills. So I just wanted to make note that in the same way things happen at your house, I used the cleaning example, you might spill a cleaning fluid. The important thing is that you address it and that you work with your partners to ensure that everyone knows what happened and that it was addressed satisfactorily.
So then if they're addressed, then it wouldn't be a problem then to get those numbers. And
those numbers exist right now on the COGCC website. In fact, they put together a comprehensive assessment of spills, so that already exists on the COGCC website. So that exists right now.
Okay, before we leave the spill subject, there's an article in the Denver Post. This is dated September 13th of last year. It says this company, Care McGee, on August 20th, 12th, 20th, 2nd, and 24th, spilled benzene at concentrations exceeding the state standards by as much as 320 times. The other chemicals from corroded equipment near the wetlands in Weld County. These spills contaminated groundwater, and in one case, the Boulder White Rock irrigation canal in South Boulder Creek. So, the paper, I know, and when they report on my industry, I can go, yeah, that's not right, that's understandable. However, I did want to bring up, because Anadarko, it's a subsidiary of Anadarko, and around our neighborhood, there's several Care McGee sites there. And I was wondering, Anadarko got an award from the COGCC for being a great operator. Can you go in and just, as it's a subsidiary, can you just take them over and say, look, you guys are not performing, and get them out of here? Because that's a concern I have.
Well, it was a subsidiary. Anadarko operates those wells. We take it very seriously. We clean up every spill immediately if we see it. Occasionally we do have an incident, and we have to make sure that it's cleaned up. We get out there and make sure that the ground's cleaned up. We get everything off the ground. We report it, and we report it to the state. And I mean, we do manage it, and we do manage it very well. I'll be straight with you. My bonus is based upon how many spills we have a year. And if we have a high number of spills, that goes against everybody that works at our company, not just me, everybody that goes into our performance. So it makes a big difference. So we think it's extremely important, and we look after it closely. Let me address another concern that you have. You're talking about from the wellhead, the pipe, to the separation equipment, and then the tanks. It's not very often that we see that the pipe from the wellhead to the tanks and the separation equipment leaks. I'm not saying that it doesn't. It can on occasion. But where you're really going to see it is at the separation equipment or the tanks, because that's a relatively active area. It concerns me that there wasn't a fence put around an area, and I hope it wasn't an Anadarko site, but I'd be surprised if it was, and the operator should take care of that, whoever it was. But what we do when we put in a facility now is you have to dig down 9 feet under those separators or tanks, and you line that with plastic and to contain it. Then you put down on the sides, all the way around that location, we put containment, and that those are walls that actually drive down 2 to 3 feet below the barrier that we put. All right, to make sure that if there is a leak, that it is captured. And all those have to handle 2 times the amount of volume that could potentially be in that particular area going to those tanks. So that particular area is very, very well protected. And if we have a spill in that area, we will report that immediately, and we'll get out there and clean it up immediately.
How long has that been done? It may be a CGC's question. I don't know, because the well in our area was first permitted in 1973, so I don't know that it would even have that. You know when those liners he was talking about underneath the...
I don't know.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, obviously this is technology evolving. This is best management practices evolving. You know, Anadarko has definitely taken steps, you know, above and beyond where our regulations go. You know, that said, I think that really does drive at a point that I think ties a lot of things together. Talking about the numbers of spills and releases, you know, maybe the acknowledgement that, you know, there are spills and releases. It happens in this process. So that said, then, let's look at what we can do to mitigate those. Anadarko, in this case, is describing something where they're lining their tank batteries. We think that's absolutely commendable.
So it's not a state regulation, that's voluntary?
That's correct. It costs them money to do that. Our regulations actually say that a tank battery has to be sufficiently impermeable to contain spilled materials. Well, that includes the bottom and the berms if they're earthen. What we've found is that, you know, in some cases that's not always the best management practice, and so operators have stepped up and gone beyond that. We have, you know, developed in the recent rulemaking the Form 2A process, which looks at the surface disturbance and looks at the potential sources, and then works with the operators, looking at, okay, you've got a tank battery, you've got flow lines, you've got potential sources. What are you going to do to make sure that if you have a release from those sources, you don't impact groundwater? You know, and in this case, lining a tank battery berm. If the tank has a release, it's contained within their lined berm. You know, so those mitigation measures that we're developing with industry, and I think this is, you know, one place where we can work very effectively with local governments to say, you know, the citizens, you know, have identified this concern, and we've identified this concern, and lo and behold, the Oil and Gas Commission has also identified the same concern. And then we come to the operator and say, what are we going to do about it? What can you do? And, you know, if the operator doesn't propose a best management practice that they're implementing voluntarily, albeit once it comes onto the permit, it's enforceable by our inspection and enforcement group, then we can put a condition of approval directly on there. You know, and then the other thing I'd like to say is again, any spills and releases, and I think we've seen a higher level of reporting of spills and releases in recent years, and I think that's actually it can be a misleading citation if you're just looking at numbers. How many spills and releases have we had? Oh, there's been an uptick in spills and releases over the last several years. Well, that's because operators are reporting things that maybe they weren't reporting in the past. And so we're seeing, we're really, what we're seeing is an improvement that they're reporting it, they're showing us what they've done to clean it up, and we're getting documentation of that whole process.
Greg, if I could just-
And then again, we go to the cleanup standards. I mean, any spill or release has to be cleaned up to our standards.
Could I just add something here? It's fine, the cleanup on the surface takes place, but the cleanup, if it contaminates groundwater, doesn't take place. You pay off the person that's contaminated. And that might...
there is no exemption.
Let me finish.
From,
you just talk for about 10 minutes.
Okay.
What happens is that the landowner's paid off, but it doesn't correct the major environmental problem, which is the groundwater. And these people use groundwater for their municipal water supply. So that may be, and in the interest of full disclosure, I think you have to admit that that's not what happens. You don't clean up groundwater.
The state of Colorado regulates the cleanup on an oil and gas release. The state of Colorado will not close a site that hasn't met cleanup standards. We do not allow an operator to, and especially, I mean, groundwater is, it's not the property of necessarily the landowner, so it's...
So once you make the cleanup, there's no lingering effects. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, let me give you three examples. In September last year, the Commission approved Petroglyph sealing some coal bed methane wells near the town of Levita that had high concentrations of methane in the groundwater, enough so that we had well exposures for a few homes, and about 30 homes had very high concentrations of methane. There was a plan by that company to clean it up. When they found out they couldn't do it, the Oil and Gas Commission gave an order to the company to plug and abandon and leave the problem. Here in Weld County, one of the wells that's tagged in Gasland, Ms. Amy Ellsworth's well, her well had thermogenic gas from the industry in her domestic well, but that wasn't cleaned up. Another example, Norm Anderson, a location near Hudson, had the Laramie Fox Hills contaminated in his domestic well with not only thermogenic gas, but with toluene. That wasn't corrected. At best, what's happening here on surface spills is they're cleaning up the soil. But if there's a leak in some of the piping, in the case of the Norm Anderson well, in the case of Petroglyph, it was failure within the well structure or lack of geologic separation. So there are specific examples where the state has walked away from groundwater contamination.
I want to see if I can ask a clarifying question on that. So are those pre or post rulemaking changes? Are there different practices in place now, whether it's from regard to remediation, reporting, or otherwise? So the events that are cited are on record. So have we changed practices since those times, and do we see a difference in events as a result?
We have changed practices since those. I mean, we have had a rulemaking since those events. That said, and I can't say that I am fully aware of the status of those remediation projects, but when we have a remediation project, because the landowner has come to an agreement with an operator, it does not mean that they are relieved from the Federal Clean Water Act or any other the Colorado state statutes, which actually we implement the Colorado state statutes for groundwater contamination. So because they have reached an agreement with the landowner does not necessarily mean that the case is closed on their cleanup activities for a release.
Hey, Greg. Hey, I have a quick question.
Suggestion for a matter of process, perhaps because this is such a hot And if I were a homeowner in this area, it would be an important topic to hear an actually factual account. Perhaps since Director Neslin is on the committee and he wasn't able to be here tonight, maybe on the agenda he could specifically address the 3 items.
Yeah, I think if we've got specific incidents that we need further input on, then we can ask for reports to come back on those. I had one item that I just wanted to insert, and then we can kick back with
Just have
questions.
one question.
Yep, and I'll pass just in here in a moment. The question about containment, we heard about the practice to drop these walls effectively around the pad to help with containment. And we saw in your presentation the practices that are in place for new wells. Most of what we have in our area, to my understanding, are existing wells because of the age of the area, the formations that were drilled at that time, and obviously the first well that we've seen fracking activity on in our community was the Adams County well site, the AB well, I guess it was referred to as. That, to me, looks like most of the wells in our area, or the containment areas in our area, where you've got a pair of tanks, a tank or a pair of tanks, the visible piping, and the earthen berm around it. These are wells that are going to be recompleted, probably as opposed to a brand new well drilled. So they're not likely to have the same containment considerations, yet a new contemporary practice is occurring at that site. And so with the permitting process for a recomplete, and this is a question that we posed to Mr. Neslin last week, what are the nuances with regard to safety measures and additional steps that need to be taken in order to recomplete a well and to refit or retrofit that tank farm? I know we heard from Hillcorp when the representative happened to make it to an ad hoc community meeting. He talked about the fact that there had been some swapping out of piping and some inspections of those tanks, but what of that is required by state and what of that is just a business practice that the operator takes on?
They are required, when they submit the Form 2 application permit to drill for the recomplete, we do review the cementing and casing of the original wellbore prior to approving any additional activity. So the subsurface, the casing, they have to have integrity of the casing. If there's any issues with what we see, we require remedial cementing before they can do anything further. Regarding the surface facilities, we do not have a requirement for an operator to upgrade surface facilities. I think in practice, we find that a lot of larger operators do anyway. And if they are, producing where they expect to increase their production sufficiently, they're going to be adding production equipment as well. So, in that case, they would upgrade those facilities. I think, getting back to spills and reporting, I think we've also found that in the upgrade process, what they're doing is they're coming back in, they're replacing a tank, they're replacing flow lines, they're finding, hey, you know what, we did have a historical release from line corrosion in the past, and they are making improvements at that time and doing repairs. So while it's not a requirement to upgrade their facilities, I think we're finding that it's pretty frequent that they are.
Greg, where does Colorado rank as far as a nation on regulation? From 1 to 10, are you guys the tops as far as regulating? I mean, because we're a lot different here.
At other state regulation regimes.
Well, just saying, because
what I will say is that I am quite proud of the ability that we have to regulate the industry in this state. Not everything that we have is contained in the rules. We have some nuances that we can work, conditions of approval that aren't in the rules that we can get additional protections. So I think we are I think we are an effective state regulatory agency. I think I don't get that feedback from the industry.
I can answer that question.
Okay, where does Colorado base their regulations on? Because you have to start from somewhere, because you have BP out in the Gulf and that incident there. So Colorado being a mile high, and we're not talking about in the mountains, right? We're talking about the surface area here. where do you, as far as see yourself compared to Wyoming? And
Right. Colorado is, so most operators across the country are national. And so Colorado, and so they choose where to invest their money. And so this is both a pro and a con in many ways, but Colorado is nationally accepted to have the toughest environmental rules in the nation. And this is widely documented. Colorado has been definitively identified as having the toughest rule in the nation with the passing of the hydraulic fracturing disclosure rule that just passed last month, which is definitively the toughest in the nation, and it was a compromise agreement between industry and the environmental community. And so there's lots of recognition that Colorado is actually the go-to state for regulation, and I can assure you that not every member of the oil and gas industry likes it. Many refuse to do business in Colorado, and many other states don't like it as well. They'll say, thanks a lot, Colorado, for exporting your regulations.
now, is there any regulations have to deal with the arsenal when it comes to Colorado oil and gas?
There are not specific regulations specific to the arsenal.
Okay.
And I will say, though, that I think that is a good, a fruitful area for discussion with this group, and an area where I think industry and the commission, understand those concerns and could adopt a memorandum of understanding or some other agreement that is specific to that specific circumstance. There's precedent for that. It was done in an area in Rio Blanco, where in 1969 the federal government decided it would be a good idea to explode a nuclear device underground. And when oil and gas operators went in and said, you know what, we'd like to explore in that area, the agency put in a whole series of conditions of approval. So there's precedent for doing things like that. Back to the question about the rules, the commission's rules were updated from soup to nuts in 2008. It was a massive rulemaking, and the industry was beside itself with the strength of those rules, and went so far as to sue the commission over those rules. So I think it just goes to Tish's point that the industry and most observers believe that Colorado's rules are among the most stringent in the country.
And beyond that, on the rulemaking, so there were some stringent rules in 2008, which proud to be part of Colorado and that we have those rules. But since then, the commission is so committed to this that they had what they call a stronger review. The stronger review is the IOGCC, which is the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. That is the original corporation commission that was put into effect back in the 1930s. But since that time, they've developed a group called Stronger. It's a review committee of technical, environmental, across the board state regulators, and they came in and they re-reviewed our Colorado's rules again earlier this year, or I guess 2010, late last year, and came up that there was a couple small changes they need to make, but it was very complimentary, and this is a really tough group. I mean, they come in and they say, what can happen? And what are the most stringent regulations? And then they make recommendations associated with that. And so, again, Colorado was proactive, said, hey, we want this group to come in and make sure we're doing the right thing.
I have a question, clarification, please. I understood that Colorado's recent fracking disclosure rules was not as stringent as some other states' disclosure rules, because Colorado allows a 60-day grace period as opposed to an immediate disclosure. Now, am I just mistaken?
What's the reason for the 60-day period?
I'm not familiar with, I haven't heard of a state that doesn't allow the 60-day, but the reason for the 60-day is because after an operator hydraulically fractures a well, they have to get the invoices so that they can document the actual quantity. So you could do an immediate documentation, but then you would have to revise it. And it perhaps could be, I know there's some pre-frac disclosure that's happening in Wyoming, and then they have to revise it. And so the consensus agreement of the group was it's better to enter data one time to prevent confusion. So
okay, I think I can clear this up real quick. The Halliburton guy, when you show up with the truck, do you have, when you're making ingredients, you have cinnamon, sugar, and this, all that. Do you come with a truck with individual ingredients, or do you bring, they say, well, this is the composition of the rock, and you go, okay, I'm going to bring this, and you bring the truck, it's already mixed?
Generally, when we arrive on location, we're more of like a chemical processing facility, if you will. We go ahead and create the frac fluid on location, so all the chemicals are brought out individually, and then we blend it on location.
Okay, so at that time, you know what's in there, right? It's going to go in the, before it's even gone down there, you've pre-mixed it. And it's going to go down there. So it's not like you have to gather invoices from, oh, they sold us this much.
Frac Focus requires the actual volumes of everything actually pumped. So you have a dynamic process. You're actually...
But their hands are on the levers, pushing knobs, turning and saying, you know, I want this much of that, I want that much of that, right?
Right, in the same way that someone comes and works on your roof, and when they leave, they don't usually, sometimes they might leave you with an invoice, but if they were going to itemize in every detail, every nail they used, they would probably go back to the shop, double check that they got all the right nails, and then send you an invoice. It's the same kind of thing.
Wouldn't take 60 days.
I mean, if he's leaving the site with a truck that's half full, he knows he used half in there of that chemical. So before he even leaves the site, he would know right on the spot.
Thanks. So just a quick time check. We have 5 more minutes to
Okay,
do this
here's my
discussion.
idea for everybody. Get an app. You know, you've got a phone, have an app for your company, so or whoever makes an app, say, boom, it'll check boxes. I put this chemical, this much in. It downloads right to your computer at your headquarters, and it goes right to COGCC. In 10 minutes, you can have that information, and in 15, it can be on the website, okay? And we need to fix that problem.
Can I
just
ask
don't know whether to shake my head ruefully or go in the bathroom and cry, because this is just
Well, I
terrible.
actually would be...
Hold on.
I just don't understand the 5-minute need.
No, there's no need, but why do you need 60 days? Why can't it be 5 minutes? There's no reason it can't be, is my point.
It could be, but with everything, if you're doing one thing, you're not doing another thing. And it's important then when we talk about regulation to identify if we're doing something, what's the value to the community? And if I would be very interested in the articulated reason because when we had these negotiations and I was very involved in them, there wasn't someone advocating for the importance of 5-minute
Well, there weren't residents
reporting.
there, were there? Probably no residents.
Well, I'm not discounting the need. I'm just saying that as we understand your needs, we can be responsive to them.
What if there's no need, but it's free and it's cheap and it's just as easy? Anyway, my point is,
Let me just stop you for 1 second. I think this is a good item, and we need to capture these, because what I don't want us to try and do in the course of good discussion is try and solve the problem at the table. I think we need to get through layers of discussion so that we get down to points where there are specific items that we want specific answers to come back on, and give individuals the relevant time to come back with a reasonable answer. If that's
I'd like to run through them real quick as much as I can. I'd like to know about the injection wells, where they are. I know it's on the GIS map. It's probably there, but I've looked at that before, and it shows wells of all kinds everywhere, and some are closed, it doesn't say. It just shows wells all over the place. So I'd like to have somebody take that information and weed it out and say, here are the injection wells in a 50-mile radius of here.
And you, just so I'm clear, you're asking for underground injection disposal wells?
Like the ones in Ohio that caused the earthquakes, just like those, where they pump. I assume it's not just fracking fluids. I'm assuming all industrial waste is pumped there, so I'd just like to know where they are.
And that's definitely something that we can generate.
Okay.
And maybe offline, let's decide the parameters of what you're looking for, the scope of the aerial extent, active, inactive, any well that's historically been used as an injection well, et cetera. I mean, there's so that we
can define that.
Okay, so that we generate a map that is actually meeting the requirements. Let's make sure that we understand the requirements.
Okay. And then for the Halliburton, I'm trying to understand why, and I've had some ideas, but why the environmentally friendly fluids that guy theoretically drank aren't used everywhere.
We introduced it last year. Right now what we're trying to do is sort out the technical application of it. The environmental frac fluid is not necessarily built for all wells in every area. It has certain temperature limitations as far as thermal stability and whatnot. So what we're trying to do is test it and present it to the operators here and find out if that's a viable solution.
So maybe you can only not use it in the winter or something like that, or?
No, when we talk about temperature limitations, we're talking about underground, like say in the Niobrara and whatnot. The upper temperature limit for the clean stim system is about 225 degrees, and that's about where you're floating on the Niobrara. So
Okay.
thermal stability, it's not going to last as long as the required design from the operator standpoint.
All right.
Dan, I'm going to have to stop. We've got 10 minutes, and I need to make sure that we address the citizens and the audience. Are the list of questions that you have the same list that you sent to Mr. Aker? Or are there any new questions?
Most of them.
Okay. If
I
there are
did
any
have one more
additional-
that's not on there, though.
If there are any additional, let's make sure that those get to Mr. Aker so they can be distributed. What I'd like to make sure we do is get answers back from folks so that we can have a list of questions posed, answers that have come back, so that folks who aren't party to the discussion have that, and they can be referenced in our later discussions. And it looks like you have a quick comment, and then I want to make sure we get our citizens' questions.
I guess I have two comments. One is that I, for one, am perfectly willing to stay for another half hour to try to hear Dan's questions and the others' questions. And part of my reasoning for that is that, when you read that list of questions, it's just like Greg's clarification here. The questions themselves are not always self-explanatory to us.
Very
So
fair.
To the extent he has time to elaborate and clarify.
So let's do a
we'll
quick
get
show of
better answers.
hands. Is everybody game for any extension? Who's unable to stay for some amount of time past the top of the hour? Anybody not able to stay past the top of the hour? Public willing to stay past the top of the hour? Staff okay for a short period of time? Okay, great. Let's agree to cap this at no later than 7:15.
And then also, to offer a suggestion, I think maybe we should compartmentalize what we're talking about here. We're talking about contamination incidents, we're talking about spills, we're talking about water. I think that we should maybe, for future reference, for future meetings, focus on those. And then we as citizens can come and say, this is what we think, this is what we would like to see, and then in turn, and then just discuss one area.
And that's actually an item that I wanted to put forward in our agenda discussion for next week. So absolutely on the same page, see if we can sort of stage
Just
that.
clarifying process question. We're just clarifying the questions. We're not trying to answer the questions right
I think
now.
that would be a great suggestion if we could go through and affirm that.
And we just got the questions yesterday, so that's why we didn't come with written responses. It wasn't that clear what the process was. So if we just clarify the questions, then we can make sure that
You
we
open to that?
coordinate.
Okay. One question I had was,
And
we're
Dan,
talking about...
let me just stop. We had published that the citizen questions would be at 10 till. Let's just make sure we dedicate those 10 minutes, plus or minus, to get those questions asked, and then we'll return to your questions before we go through our prep for next week. Is that fair? Okay. So our first question is from Kathy McIntyre.
We actually both like to give our time to our representatives.
Okay, great.
To Jody and multiple, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Dan and Jody can speak on.
Okay, and then is it Tori? Oh, I'm sorry. There was a yes for questions. No worries. Okay. Well then, thank you. Back to you, Mr. Stapleton.
Okay.
Now I have to leave at 7.
Trying to...
I don't have, since I'm standing in for someone, I don't have the printed list of questions. Is there a way I can get a copy of the printed list of questions? That would be
Is
helpful.
it in the book?
They were in an
It
email.
might. Is it in the book? Where's Tom? Is Tom?
It wasn't on the agenda.
Is it in the book? Or? I don't know. Oh, okay.
Hey, while you guys looking at that, I have a question back to the samples. Do you guys ask for samples? So when they have their concoction all ready to go, do they offer you guys a sample so in case there is a spill, you can identify those chemicals?
So the purpose of the baseline groundwater program and FRAC Focus is to get to the heart of your question, although I'm not sure I'm supposed to be answering questions, so maybe that's just a question I'm supposed to be
that's
writing
a question
down.
you guys can come back
Sorry.
with, answer.
So exactly related to that, you could write down for a question would be...
And who is capturing the questions? I'm not unclear on the process.
We have staff helping to capture questions.
Okay, so we're just clarifying the questions.
Okay. One thing would be to help with Steve's, or to add on to his question is, if you do baseline water testing, exactly what do you test for? If you give us the list, because my concern is you test for these things, and they put this much in the chemical in the fluid, and that's not part of the baseline test. So you don't have no idea really if you've added that or not.
I'm only nodding because I'm not answering questions. But
Okay.
yes, we
My
can
other-
answer
another
that
question
question.
I had was
yes,
for-
I could answer that question right now, but go ahead. Next one.
Okay. For industry, I had a question was, I just been passed or been emailed an idea that there's a company in Canada that uses propane instead of water, and so you would not use any water for the fracking portion of it. and then the gas, the propane would kind of blend in with the natural gas and come out, and you could turn around and just sell it. So all your product that you'd use when sold. My question, would guess for next week, or I don't know if, probably next would be good, is can you do that? I mean, do you have to call that Canadian company? Do they have a patent? Is there resistance to doing that because the profit's lower because they're doing it instead of you doing it? Or you can say, no, we can do that ourselves, and because they claim it's cheaper than buying the water, especially when they reclaim all of it, and then it's theoretically cleaner. And the other thing was the air quality in the whole process. I had been concerned about the condensate tanks, stuff coming off of those, and they had been talked about the burners and said, oh, no, it's very clean. I just want to make sure we're really locked down on the air quality because we did talk about the ozone, and if we can do anything, I say this process, our committee, identifying areas that we can keep the air cleaner and contribute to bringing the air ozone problem down, then that would be a great thing.
Just clarifying question. Air quality is a huge topic of which many volumes could be written. So I just want to ask a clarifying question. If on some of these topics you maybe want to bring in a presenter, depending on the priority that it is to the citizens, just a primer on air quality and oil and gas could, a good one that would bring some measure of meaningful interaction would be an hour. You couldn't do a meaningful response in a paragraph that would mean anything. We could say everything is permitted or something like that, but it wouldn't be satisfying. So perhaps you could somehow we could have an exchange where some topics are prioritized and appropriate third parties could come in and give presentations.
Well, industry-related things you could respond to later would be, I've seen these ads for Freightliner trucks that produce 95% less emissions, don't put any black smoke, they inject something into the exhaust so that almost nothing comes out except nitrogen. That's the kind of thing I like to find out.
I just want to touch on this comment because this is, just tie it back to the plan for the agenda discussion. We had taken an item off the agenda, which was the issue and data identification. And the goal of that was to try and build a list of categories of discussion so that we could line those up and determine if there were external experts that we wanted to bring in to add some additional perspective. So whether that's obviously not going to happen in the course of tonight. We need to get these questions gelled so that they're clear enough that we can get good answers back, meaningful answers back, and also, to Ms. Bacon's point, put together essentially segments of discussion so that we can get those lined up and dedicate the appropriate time on that subject and not be all over the place. So I didn't want to miss that before you proceeded, Mr. Stapleton. Thank you.
Let me just follow up real quick, Dan. This issue came up last night in Erie, and one of the city trustees asked the question of the industry, would the industry allow access for the city to do ambient air monitoring? What's missing from the scientific analysis of this chemical process is baseline data, of any data, on hazardous air pollutants that are coming off the fracking activity.
Is that a question for us to answer next week? Just to
The
stick to our...
The question isn't to industry. The question...
I'm just clarifying that I think our purpose here is to identify questions for us to answer.
Hold on, we'll figure out who answers it. One question you can ask yourselves, how do you assure that there's no hazardous air pollutants coming from these processes? The way the Erie city official asked it was, would they grant access? They're getting to how it's done. What I'm talking about is synoptic, just burp testing, the kind that's done with Sumi canisters or vacuum containers, or these pretty expensive but useful cameras that can be pointed at an operation and tell you what chemicals are in the releases and at what concentrations.
So it sounds like we need to put an item, just with all due respect, put an item on the list for an air quality discussion and monitoring, and look at the means available, what the opportunity is for industry to work with us to see what those opportunities are.
And specifically for hazardous air pollutants that come off infrequently.
Okay.
I would be sure that we get CDPHE to come in and talk, and then get some air experts to come in and talk about this issue, because it's extremely complex. Taking burp samples or taking a FLIR camera and trying to look at it is probably not sufficient for what the public is very interested in. I think,
Well, I think it is sufficient. It's certainly better than nothing.
Oh, absolutely. I have another presentation if you want me to show you what we do. but it's a very, very complex issue, and I don't think we want to just have industry representatives trying to answer a few questions. I really agree with Tisha that we need to get the experts in here to really explain it to you so we all understand it.
Just to clarify my purpose, I don't want to be, it's the opposite of being dismissive. We could write 1 or 2 or 3 sentence answers to these questions, but I really want to respect the spirit with which the questions are asked, which is protecting communities and families. And to do that, there are no simple answers. We could say we do X, Y, and Z, but then if you really understand, then you might say, why not A, B, and C? And those are the value of these conversations, but they do require time.
Yeah, with the CDPHE, and I mean, I think so much of this discussion concerns issues about causation and exposure and toxicology, and maybe this is an area for Tri-County Health, but all of those things are raised by these questions.
Which also
I agree
begs,
totally with you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree totally that there needs to be a whole evening at least spent if you really want to delve into the air quality in the Commerce City area.
So that would be one night's worth of
reams
discussions where we bring in the
paper
professional.
written about it, millions of samples taken, and it probably still is not adequate to address what you're looking for.
I would suggest that since the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has come out publicly asking for an examination of air quality from fracking, that they must have information at hand would be beneficial to us. Now, I'm not suggesting that senior scientist would come up here and talk to us, but I am suggesting that the information he has that would allow him to make such a public statement might be available to us. And that's independent and I would hope objective information. So I think we should explore the option, if you agreed, of going to the CDC and finding out what they have and what alarms them.
I want to have one more question asked, and then I'm going to suggest that given kind of where we're heading, we take our last 15 minutes and do a bit of what we had planned on doing anyway, which is to brainstorm the order of discussion and agree to what we might want to set out to accomplish over the next several meetings, and agree that we're willing to meet beyond what was in our initial 4-week period. We wanted to revisit that this week, next week, and kind of get a sense that are folks game for continuing. If so, daytime, et cetera. But I think most importantly, what is it we need to spend more time on? How much time do we need to spend on it? And who do we need to get in here to help speak to that? Because we can't necessarily expect the right expert is going to be available next week, but we need to get those needs identified and communicated as quickly as we can to find out when they can be available to come. Is that a fair way to allocate the remainder of our time?
Yes.
Yeah, actually that's what I was going to say, get back to you. Maybe we need to decide on either breakout sessions or just meetings, and because I don't know, I mean, it'd be great to have the representatives from the oil and gas industry here, but if they don't want to be, there may be sessions where we have air quality people come and talk, and they want to come or they don't want to come, they can make their own mind about coming. So we may have some sessions that we just have an air quality person come and talk the whole time. That may be a consideration.
Okay. So in the spirit of trying to come up with a run of show, does anybody have an idea on a logical progression? We started with the sense of, let's get some baseline knowledge about the operations. And so the intent of the beginning of this meeting was to try and make sure that all of us had a similar level of, or at least a reasonable baseline level of understanding on the operation. I think we've probably got that to a reasonable degree now, plus our independent homework that we've been doing to try and get a better perspective. The thought was that we then get a good sense of what the citizen questions and key areas of concern are, and try and get those in the hands of industry and our other experts to start to ruminate on. My thought was that next week we potentially start to delve into more of an environmental focus on questions or input from an environmental perspective, and include at that time the perspective of the Arsenal experts. So a little bit of background on what's happened there, any areas of concern that they might have. And then from there, it's sort of, where do we go? Do we need to do a deeper dive on the actual drilling operation? Do we need to do a deeper dive on the operational sort of day in, day out of the tank farm and the safety? I don't know necessarily how we partition those items up, but to me, we've got to find some logical way to bucketize this discussion so that we can come away with, from each of those, with a list of things that we want to put down for.
Well, I think we need to start with Rocky Mountain Arsenal, because I think a lot of things hinge on that, and I think there's a lot of things that may or may not go according to plan based on what we know about the Rocky Mountain Arsenal.
I think
So
that
I
would be
suggest
good
that we
for next
start.
week, yeah.
I would absolutely agree that that should be a priority, because that's one of our most major concerns.
To the arsenal by peripheral.
It'd be good for the industry to still be here for that one, too.
We have a lot of folks saying the arsenal, and I don't know that everybody has a sense of why the arsenal is a concern or what specifically we want to try and address. And so let me see if I can state this in a way that we can all buy into to help guide that discussion. This community obviously was impacted by an operation on the former Rocky Mountain Arsenal where chemical weapons were developed, and ultimately a chemical company came in and operated and did things that they said weren't going to be harmful, that ultimately proved to be very harmful to the community, impacted water, and created a decades-long fight between a community and both the Army and industry to solve. The remediation, we've talked about these smaller remediations for spills, et cetera. That remediation has taken years and years and is essentially completed. The last pieces of that recently deleted. So this community has a very fresh recollection of what damage can come. And so I think that obviously has a significant factor or plays a significant role in the tone of some of the questions specifically around environmental impacts coming from these operations. That said, part of the remediation for the refuge, or the Arsenal now refuge, was to take pieces of that operation that were so highly polluted that they could not be moved off-site. And they were essentially encapsulated on-site. And so there are concerns that operations peripheral to the refuge that involve fracking, which could invoke some seismic activity, could have some impact on those containment vessels. Great fear that if something were to rupture, we deal with a very serious sort of Stephen King stand kind of situation. Nobody wants to see that happen. We don't know that any of us have enough facts in hand to say that that is or is not a realistic concern. And so I think what I've heard from the citizens is a desire to have the stakeholders that have firsthand knowledge of what's going on and has happened there, along with industry present to say, what are the realities of that situation? And we obviously have heard comments from Mr. Neslin and others that say, perhaps there are things that we can do from a special conditions perspective for activity in and around the refuge. But I think the goal is to say, let's have that session potentially next week, and then out of that, what are the things that are viable or not, and how do we move those into a second round or a second layer of discussion?
Do you want to make that entire meeting next week contain that, or just like the first hour?
My sense was to try and maybe treat that as sort of environmental/refuge. I don't know that that's fair. Maybe the environmental discussion next week following the refuge discussion is what are the deeper dive items related to environment that we want to talk about and tie those. I'm trying to figure out how we tie these into the realities of what's going to happen in Commerce City, because we could talk about what's happened in New Mexico in a different geology, in a different, domain, and I want to make sure that we don't overburden this discussion with things that don't directly apply to us. So to the extent possible, what kind of operations are going to be occurring in Commerce City? We know that there are going to be recompletes of old wells and new wells likely to be drilled. So we want to understand the intensities of those activities and the risks associated with those activities. We want to understand the risks associated with what's going to happen with activity, peripheral to the refuge. Is there a risk there? Is there not? Do we want to take that risk? And then understand from those discussions what we need to consider working out with you all to, A, keep the community safe from the most significant of those concerns, and then the day in, day out concerns as oil and gas activity really start to take root in the community. So I think people jump in if that makes sense. I'm trying to restate what I think
what I like to do, what the citizens are pushing also is I hear a lot of when you guys are going to do this. What I would like to see is how the city can direct as far as where drilling can occur, because we are so top-heavy and residential in the north, and we have annexed a lot of land here in Commerce City. So the reality of this is not going to get done in another 4 weeks. Is the Oil and Gas Commission comfortable if this stretched out 3 or 4 months on this discussion? Because this is a really a delicate topic here in Commerce City, because we sit on in our area a really precious part as far as land. And would you guys oppose to that if our discussions were deep and they were concerned and we were hitting every topic, so we had everything covered, all the I's dotted, all the T's crossed? If it took that long, I mean, because the oil shale's not going anywhere, and we need to have that kind of relationship here. And if we're having a working relationship, we need to cover all bases, because this is really important. I was disturbed that a few months ago there was quite a few residents that put their homes for sale, and last week I just told there was many more. And I hate to see that. I like to for Commerce City be a place where people can call home, not a place to say, hey, I really don't want to put my stakes down here. So how do you guys feel about that?
I think the commission is definitely committed to working through this process, and any other avenues that we have to make sure that we are addressing valid, legitimate concerns, which there are valid, legitimate concerns. So yeah, I would say that, we are willing to continue working. As long as we see productive discussion, productive discourse, moving in a positive direction, that our agency will continue to participate. And I hope that industry is in the same boat. I think we want to see. I mean, ultimately, I think there's some benefits to the city of having some development. It's certainly part of our mandate, and we want to oversee that in a responsible manner. So, yeah, we are willing to participate and to continue to participate.
Okay.
Well, on behalf of the oil and gas industry, we're also happy to continue to participate. I would suggest, if we're going to meet weekly for months, that we really tighten up the topics, because then we could get the right people here. We could be, if we know the questions in advance, we can prepare responses. And so if it's helpful, I had kept a list of the topics, and maybe it's not for tonight, but in terms of future meeting topics, to pick a topic. Environmental is definitely not a topic to us. It's a list of 6 subtopics, but that would be relevant. And I also don't know if, because I don't know the citizens' responsibilities, if there's a time of day that's better suited for the group if we're going to meet weekly, because this becomes then a weekly meeting. So just a thought for many, if there's many people who are here and want it during the daylight hours, just for those with children and such.
Absolutely, and that was part of the discussion last week, was day and time. We had started on a Thursday, we moved to a Wednesday. We looked at this time to try and be sensitive to staff that was supporting us here, obviously, and not getting too late into the evening, but that's obviously a balance with folks that this subject is not their day job, and those of us on council, obviously, this is not our day job either. So I think we're all good and critical things to talk about, because if we don't have efficient and well-structured meetings, then people are going to lose interest and we're not going to get much accomplished. And so with that said, if you've got an idea of categories or a progression of discussion and you want to throw it out there.
Can we start with the arsenal and then add on to there the environmental? And I'm thinking, first and foremost would be just water, air, infrastructure. Those are my top 3 in terms of environmental. And maybe we can situate it as such where we have the arsenal as the next meeting, but then, I'm pretty sure if we can tighten our belts a little bit and stay on task, that we could probably move into at least start touching on water.
Can I just ask a clarifying question about the arsenal? Because I'm not sure if the question is hypothetical future development of the arsenal or wanting to know. I don't know anything about leasing or who owns minerals, et cetera, on the arsenal. Maybe somebody does, but is that part of what the information you're looking for? Because maybe a handful of questions would help us ensure the right people get to the meeting.
Right, that'd be really helpful if we could kind of zero in on that.
Well, I guess, the fact that we've already started and we've got wells and stuff in operation, I figured that you guys may have already known about the arsenal and taken that into consideration. Is that not the case? Did you guys know about the arsenal before you started over with the first well? Is there anything you guys have done?
Let's break that question down. When you say, do you know about the arsenal, what are you asking? Did they know?
I'm asking them what they've already done so that we can have a starting point. So we can say, if you've already looked at, where the injection sites are, where the soil, the contaminated soil, if you know about that, if they know about that, that's a starting point. So then we bring in Mr. Sharman from the RMA, who then would say, here's where it's at. Maybe they need to be informed about it. I don't want to bring him in and have them inform him about it if they already know about that. That's where my question is
Okay,
based
because
on.
I sitting on the RAB for 12 years, knowing about the arsenal intimately, I'm trying to figure out, everybody keeps saying the arsenal. At the city council meeting, they brought up it's the most polluted piece of land in the United States. And then I hear Steve say he wonders why people are moving. I mean,
that's just for the fracking.
I know, but if you hear something like that, why would you stay if you're sitting right next to it?
No, we know about that. And as homeowners who purchased homes here, we were well aware of, and we signed off on
I know that, but see,
our homes knowing
to
that.
me, when you
But we
bring
didn't
in
know
a
that there was gonna be
statement
fracking
like that,
operations.
it's a Chicken Little thing. The arsenal has basically been reclamated. We don't call it cleaned up, we call it reclamated. There are only a certain spots in the arsenal that will stay, the ELF and the hazardous landfill. There is no way that fracking is ever going to get near them.
I'm going to stop the discussion for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want a starting point here is all I'm asking for.
I'm going to put a couple ground rules back out there that we kind of touched on last week. We need to ask as specific a question as we can. Throwing big, broad questions out there doesn't set up discussion for constructive, productive discussion. So
then I guess I don't know where to start.
Just let me finish it. I'll throw it your way. I'm sorry, Ken. We need to make sure everybody has the same background on the refuge. Let's not get into a refuge discussion tonight. Mr. Sharman is on the docket for next week. Mr. Conright has had a long history with that.
And if I may, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would hope that a couple questions you might have would be, were the landfills, the caps, the covers designed to withstand an earthquake? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Seems like another question would be related to the deep injection well. How deep is it? And again, I'm not a geologist, but what formation was that drilled to, et cetera, et cetera? Because probably, if it's in a different formation, it does not have a lot of value to the oil and gas industry, because why would they want to drill into somewhere and take out hazardous material if they could even get it out? It just doesn't.
Absolutely. They're smart people. That's why I thought maybe
Sure.
yeah, that's why I was asking the question.
So I hope that would be the type of question that.
Right, and I can't see your label, so I don't know
I'm sorry.
who you are.
I'm Ken Conright with Tri-County Health Department.
Okay.
I'm sorry
Ken.
I was.
That's okay. I can't see your sign.
Sorry I was late, but.
Jason, could I make a couple suggestions?
Go for it.
We spent $2 billion cleaning that place up out there, and Denver Water has a master plan. So I would suggest that maybe you advise Denver Water to come here and talk about what their master plan is, because they've got a lot of.
We're served by South Adams County Water and Sanitation, and actually Jim Jones, the general manager, was present at a community meeting last night and has made himself available to come and join.
And I think most of the minerals owned by the feds out there.
Yeah, and I think again,
Right.
we'll
That's
get
another question that I would think you'd want answered,
Okay,
and they can
so
do
where
that.
do you think we should start with the RMA next week?
So
Those type questions. I mean, we can brief the Army on that to come and present that to you.
Okay, perfect.
So you know that firsthand.
guys, we're now 20 minutes after we agreed to extend to 15, and I want to be very respectful of that fact. if we can ask the citizens, anybody at this table that has questions about anything to do with the arsenal, water, what happened, historical activity, remediation efforts, etc., get those to us as soon as possible. Send those to T. Aker at
Maybe set a date, because otherwise...
Yes, I was just going to say, let's look at the calendar.
Jason.
Jim.
I talked to Charlie Sharman yesterday, and he told me that they were going to be putting a list of FAQs either on our website. They're going to give them to Tom, and he's going to put them on our website either later on this week or next week. They'll have their own list of FAQs.
They will, and he'll probably have those in hand when he comes next week. So Friday, close of business. All questions to Tom Aker, T-Aker at c3gov.com. He'll hand those to Freddie this Friday, close of business. He'll get those relayed to Mr. Sharman, and we will then reconvene to walk through those questions, and I would assume he's got a number of presentations he can pull off the shelf that'll give the historical background for folks that aren't familiar with the arsenal, which leaves us with day and time for next week. I think we had...
I think I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you think that the RMA and what we're doing there will encompass the entire meeting, or should we then plan to start getting into other...
I would suggest that we take the arsenal discussion as deep into the meeting as is necessary and leave the balance of the agenda set for more of a brainstorming session on how we order meetings and discussion going forward.
That sounds like a good idea, Jason.
I was wondering, we were talking about for people that may want to not come, or they can know okay, I can take a break for this meeting. I don't know if Halliburton wants to come, and I'll see COGA may want to come. I would think maybe Anadarko, because I think they've got properties in that area, so that might be a consideration. So I'm thinking RMA, Anadarko, and Tri-County Health is that we're talking for, and then whoever else wants to come.
Come
to the meeting. I was just saying, we don't need everybody here, like Hillcorp. I don't know if they care to come to the meeting next week.
And I appreciate that sensitivity, and I think if folks are unable to come, please let us know. I think the intent is to try and keep this committee present for these discussions so that we all have the benefit of the information conveyed. I think questions are going to come up that might require an answer or perspective from anyone. So let's assume that everybody's going to be there. Did we settle on Wednesday or Thursday for next week? Wednesday. 5 p.m. still for next week.
And Dan, I'd just like to say that from our agency's perspective, I mean, we have, a variety of staff with variety of expertise. So I think what this whole group will see is that we do, we send different people depending on the topic. The first question that was asked to me is not in my expertise. So, unfortunately, we may be limited in some cases like that. But in other cases, I think we'll try and, if we know the topics ahead of time, we will try and have the right people so that you really get the best value from us being here.
So we're not going to go back to the Thursdays. We're staying on the Wednesdays? Because I can't do Wednesdays. Not that the whole thing has to stop on account of me, but... Well,
you bring up an interesting point. Next Wednesday, we would not be able to use this room. We would be relegated to a meeting room across the hall, which would limit the room we have to spread out. JD?
Input as far as if that's the topic, the next topic, I think that's a hot topic for a lot of citizens. I think you might get, whether they tune in or whether they're here, I think that's something so many citizens would like to hear is the arsenal information. So I don't think I would hold it in a room that can't be served that neat.
And also at that time, too, it's prohibitive to most people who are working, too. They're either en route home or...
So again, these meetings are recorded. They're streamed live. They'll be available for replay. We need to be mindful of the fact that everybody's got another commitment, and we're all stepping out of those to be here together. Thursday of next week, or Tom, do we know if...
Next Thursday. What's next Thursday?
There's a special planning committee.
Thursday at what time?
We have to confirm. There's a special planning committee meeting, planning commission meeting in this room next Wednesday. So in order to
Thursday's
work,
the 19th.
Yeah.
Yes.
The event in the morning is
Yeah, he can't. He's done for right now.
I sent an invitation to it by CASA, but not in this building, no. But
Been there for 21
You know, that should be good.
Okay. I've just been told that we can at least film and record if we're in the other room. Obviously, this room would be optimal if we expect a higher attendance. So, what do we need to do to confirm that? Is that something we can? All right. Will everybody be available via email tomorrow for communication from Tom to confirm Wednesday versus Thursday at 5 p.m.? Okay. So look for an email from Tom tomorrow to confirm time and either Wednesday or Thursday of next week. Plan for the meeting to focus primarily on the refuge. We will use the remainder of the meeting to agree on an order of discussion for the subsequent meetings.
Maybe a show of hands for who can be here Thursday and who cannot for, whatever, both days. 'Cause
Absolutely. So Wednesday can be here?
Can or cannot?
If you can be here on Wednesday at 5 p.m., hand in the air.
Well, you can't.
Can be here. Affirmative.
Can or can't? Now I'm lost. Oh, I can be here Wednesday.
Yes, I can be here.
Yes, you can.
Okay, hands down. Hands up if you can be here on Thursday. Pretty fair split.
Either, I just talked to our city attorney. Thursday is, the first and third Thursdays are jury court days, so that's likely it could run late. So either way, next week, we're going to have to use 21 way.
Okay. Anybody have a suggestion on how to break the tie? Because it looked like a tie to me.
How about, was this room going to be used earlier?
We are not going to be able to use this room for either night next week.
Okay. Because what about earlier in the day on Wednesday? Like 3?
I could make it.
It would still be in court.
I can do it.
We will.
Guys, the paid people are.
regardless of time, we're going to be in a smaller room for that discussion.
And we can make it on Thursday or Wednesday at 3. Can everybody make it on Wednesday at 3?
Hands for Wednesday at 3.
I think so. Not sure.
But what about the public? I mean, are they going to be off work? Of course, they can get it streamed.
But they can see it on TV later because they can record.
They
in
will
that
record
room.
in the other room, and it will be streamed.
Can I also suggest we think about the other topics we wanted to discuss, environmental,
ask-
the water?
We cannot live stream it. It would be recorded and available for replay when we meet.
I didn't think it was the same as what it's in here.
It's not.
I didn't think it was the same.
As long as they all get the information.
Okay, so let's recap. We're going to meet at 3 o'clock next Wednesday in the planning room across the hall. When you come in the main front door, before you see the staircase, there's a sign above a door that says planning. You go in that door and there's a board type room, and that's where we'll be set up. We'll focus on the refuge, and we'll focus on brainstorming order of show for subsequent discussion. To that point, when you send your questions by Friday close of business, also send suggested categories or topics of discussion. The order in which you'd like to see those items discussed, send those over. I will work with staff and my peers on council to help bring some order to that, and we can use that as our jumping off point when we get into that discussion next week. That make sense?
Makes sense.
Last question. Just last clarifying question. I just want to make sure that you're arranging for who the speakers are to answer the questions, because, for example, on the Arsenal, the industry isn't.
That's
gonna be
right.
prepared
And
to
so we'll
answer.
have Mr. Sharman, and obviously we have Mr. Conright here from Tri-County, who has a long history, and actually Mr. Bullock has been very close to that from a council and RMA RAB perspective. And again, as we identify future discussion topics, we will identify needed speakers, and we'll work to get those invites out so that we can assure their attendance. With that said, is there anything else before we close for the night? Thank you, guys. Obviously, this is we'll get our legs and get a rhythm going here, and I appreciate all of your energy and participation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason, for.
Good job, Jason.
Then we set a target for each of these metrics, which gives us a goal to strive toward. Then finally, we have measures that show our progress in meeting the targets. As I said before, some of these are tracked